Hello and welcome to Mooks and Monsters. I'm Rob Ward.
And I'm Tim Niederreiter, and this is episode 95 of the podcast.
And today we're going to be talking about lessons from Disney Weenies. Now, what the hell is a Disney Weenie? I was on YouTube the other day and I found this channel called Rob Plays. Rob is known for his Disney World videos and Disneyland videos, and apparently he's a big Disney buff. I started watching it because the video title struck me. I'm not a fan of Disney World at all, but I'll give it that. They do know how to create a world and keep you in that world. So, according to this video, a Disney Weenie is a landmark in which guests can orient themselves and know where they are in the park. For example, if you take Epcot, it's Spaceship Earth, the giant golf ball. And the reason they call them weenies is because when Walt Disney used to come home from work, he would give his dog a weenie, a little hot dog. And, the dog would always be expecting the weenie. So guests would be expecting, to orient themselves and know where they are. And thus, that's why the term weenies have become synonymous with, like, the castle in the Magic Kingdom, the Tree of Life in the Animal Kingdom, big things like that.
Right. And there's a lot of good ways to apply this kind of concept to role-playing games, and we'll get to that. Do you want to say more about the history of the place? Because they started out being, the Weenies started out as kind of a means to organize the park in some ways.
Yeah, because if any of you have ever been to Disney World or Disneyland, with the different parks that are around, each park kind of has a theme, and within those in the park, there's several themes. For example, there is Adventureland. Let's take the Magic Kingdom. Mm-hmm. Magic Kingdom is everything that makes Disney Disney. The magic, the wonder. So they have Adventureland, which is their big weenie. There is Splash Mountain, which is a giant water ride. They have Tomorrowland, which is based on spaceships and stuff like that. And for the longest time, they had a rocket, but now there's a Spaceship Earth, which is a big roller coaster that's in this really modern-looking pavilion. And just stuff like that.
Well, the Tower of Terror is the other one, the old hotel-looking thing.
Yeah, and that's that's in another park, Disney Hollywood Studios. But it's pretty much that. Like, when you think of a park, you have an image that's automatically associated with it. That's why sometimes you'll see, like, whenever people talk about Epcot, they're gonna show the giant golf ball, because that's what Epcot is. When the Magic Kingdom, that's what the Cinderella's castle is. Yeah, and there's just several things that go into that. It's really, well. Let's take into the role playing world.
Yeah.
If anyone is familiar with the D&D campaign, the module, a White Plume Mountain, your weenie's the big White Plume Mountain.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot, just in general, there's a lot of location-based adventures are like this, right? You've got in old D&D modules, there's a lot of these. I mean, I remember also in Dragon Magazine, no, it was Dungeon Magazine, because it's about the dungeons. There was this one really cool adventure I remember called Ranamore, which is all took place in this, mostly took place in this city in the jungle called Ranamore. You know, it's the same kind of thing. Or there's also another volume in another issue of Dungeon Magazine back in the day. There was also what was it called? I forget the name of the adventure, but it was one that took place during the Crusades. So it was more of a historical feel, but it was D&D. And the fortress at Masada was in it, and that was kind of the face of the adventure in some ways.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and like with the weenies like those, I guess the best way to use them in a role play as a GM or a DM or a keeper, if you have your players being in this, when your players are in the world, and they go into a new town, there should be something that you can recognize that town and make it different, and also orient your players into something else. Like, for example, let's take a real life city. Istanbul used to be Constantinople.
Don't sing.
Istanbul is Constantinople. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. But what is Istanbul known for? It's known for the Hagia Sophia. It's known for the giant walls around the city.
Yeah.
It's known for the port. Yeah. So there's like several landmarks in weenies are really just another term for landmarks.
Though actually, I would argue, we're going to go into this more of this later, but I would argue that in an RPG that can be more than just a landmark, because we're not dealing with an actual place. We can do other things that are similar that work like weenies. So just to put a pin in that.
Why don't we go into that then?
Oh, sure. We can go into that then. So,
yeah.
So I was thinking weenies can be really any major element of the story. So we've hit on the setting-based element. You know, we've got and I consider there to be three main elements of story, and those apply to RPGs as well as books and fiction of all kinds. So there's the settings or worlds. And in that case, we have the physical weenies, which are landmarks, basically. And they can be places where you go, or they can be places you just see from a distance, and they orient you in the world. And then there's also plot weenies. And it just sounds kind of silly, but it makes sense. Plot weenies are, you know, the iconic moments that define your story or your RPG. And so if you have, you know, a plot weenie in Harry Potter is like the death of Harry's parents. All the characters who were around at that time, we kind of know what they were up to around that time. So in Harry Potter, so you have an idea of like, okay, like and even in the first book, you've got the flying motorcycle that doesn't belong to Hagrid, but he's using it in that first book. It's that kind of thing. It's like you got, and that's an object. The motorcycle is an object that they talk about. You know, this was Sirius Black's motorcycle, but you don't even meet him for 2 more books. But but we do know that he was related to the situation somehow. And so the situation is something we can relate everyone to. I think that makes sense. I think that's a pretty good example of a plot weenie, even though it's backstory. That's what makes it so easy to reference it. The other kind of weenie is the character weenie. And go back to Harry Potter for a second. We've got Voldemort, and everybody has an opinion of Voldemort, and everybody has a different way they interact with Voldemort in the world. Another great example of character weenies is in this anime that's very popular right now that I really enjoy, called My Hero Academia. And in this show, the most powerful superhero of them all is the main character weenie. Every other character has some kind of opinion of him, and they have goals that are based around him. And this character is, you know, he's not all powerful, but he is the most powerful hero, and therefore everybody in the world knows it. And it's a big, you know, he's a hugely famous character, and so everybody has kind of an opinion of him. That's kind of how I see a character weenie work. Does that make sense?
Okay, so you're saying like something. Well, it's like, yeah, something like a plot weenie would be in Game of Thrones, the Robert's Rebellion,
right?
And yeah, a character weenie would be someone like Voldemort.
Yeah, or you know, and you could say a character weenie could even be Robert Baratheon, because he's the king. You know, at the beginning of Game of Thrones, even later on, and that's the other thing, because even a character that's gone and not present in the story later on can still be a character weenie. In fact, one of the biggest character weenies in Game of Thrones, and spoiler alert for the first season, first book, but is Ned Stark, and we don't need to necessarily go into why. We probably spoiled that already on this show, but everyone's probably already seen that.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's really a fulcrum.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what a character weenie is to me.
Yeah, but like going back to just kind of knowing, like using the weenie as a guide where where everything else in the world is in reference to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't we, you said you had an example earlier before we started recording.
An example of the characters, you mean like a brainstorm example?
Yeah.
Sure. So I think the storylines I listed are examples of existing works where this is the case. But imagine, and obviously Voldemort's a very fantasy Dark Lord character. Everybody knows about the Dark Lord. Everybody's aware of the Dark Lord. So that's that. Let's go aside from that for this next example. Another example of a character weenie would be, a character who knows everyone in a world. Like, this is the kind, like, my brother is playing The Witcher 3 right now, and the main character in that is kind of a weenie. Even though he's and also you go back to The Witcher 1, okay, the video game The Witcher. I think we actually have talked about this on the show before. In The Witcher,
we've talked about The Witcher, but I would argue that that's like but you're playing the main character, so he's not really a weenie.
But in the first Witcher game, he doesn't have any memories.
Uh-huh.
He starts off as an amnesiac, and therefore his relationships with the other characters are things that you're informed about later on, and therefore he kind of is a weenie. But we can disagree on that. That's fine.
I would argue that your player characters are not the weenies, because then they just
he just has a compass attached to him. Yeah. Kind of.
Yeah, you're essentially like, it's your journey through the world.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, and that's what I argue. I'd argue that a weenie is something that is in the world that's not you, that you are in reference to. Thus, I'm pretty landmarks. I can totally see as weenies. Certain characters and events, yes. I'm not sure that a player character would be a weenie, because
that's a fair point.
It's their journey. Yeah.
I mean, in fiction, he could be a weenie, but not in the RPG. That's fair to say.
Well, I mean, even then, it's just like
the protagonist
who is taking. Okay. I would argue that it's not. Okay. And for the sake of simplicity, I'd say that, a big event or a major character, an NPC, or a landmark are weenies.
Okay. Yeah, that goes with what we were saying before. I'm just trying. Okay, so now we've got a better definition. I think I can agree with that.
Yeah. Just because otherwise, anything important would then become what we're talking about. But we're really not talking about that. We're talking about
basically things that are external. They're external things you can look at and say that's where we are.
Precisely. Yeah, they are external. They are.
In which case, plot weenies are actually kind of the most challenging to do. Would you say that?
I would say that. Yeah.
Because they're turning points, but they're also external turning points. Oh, I actually think of a good example of that. That's like if there's a war that starts in a story and your characters didn't start the war, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, okay, we're in these two nations, we're operating between two nations, and now the two nations are at war with each other. Mm-hmm. Now the plot weenie is the war started, and now not. I mean, it's kind of, or like there was an event that started the war, and that's the plot weenie. Where were you when JFK was shot? That kind of thing.
Yeah, that would be a good starting basis for where everyone is in relationship to that, and going forward, how we help that with the game. It's exactly that. Where was everyone in reference to that at that time? Were they even born yet?
Yeah.
Were they even where do they go?
What were they doing? Yeah.
What's their opinion of it?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I would say, going back, to help GMs and help players with this idea, And when we throw out ideas on the show, it's a lot like, you take what you feel could be useful, and if you feel like something can't be useful, discard it. Who
Hmm.
cares? But
Absolutely.
these are like just hints and tips that we kind of find in the world and we bring back that we can definitely solidify. Like, if you don't play a game with miniatures or maps and your character is going to generic town number F, you know, where could they, just so they get an understanding of where they are, where is the marketplace? Where is the main hall? And
Right.
where is the plot point? And where are they all in relation to each other?
Right. No, that's a good point. Yeah, you just keep it simple. And if you keep it simple, all you need to know is basically where the general location of each thing, right? This and the
Yeah.
relative locations. So like the castle's over here, and there's the path that leads into the dark forest, and the witches live in the forest, that kind of thing. Um,
Mm-hmm. Because especially if you have a big setting like a like a space opera,
yeah,
or if you have a big setting a like a continent, you need to know where each thing is in relationship to each other. Like, for instance, is someone in Florida going to be affected by something that happens in Chicago?
hmm,
Maybe, maybe not.
yeah. Or how
Yeah,
big does
but
an
if
event in Chicago have to be? How big does an event in the Midwest have to be felt in Florida? That kind of thing also is important, is interesting.
yeah, exactly. It's and if you like going, and I know this kind of sounds jumping around, but if you are in Chicago, where are you in relationship to the Sears Tower or Soldier Field or um Sox Park, Wrigley Park? Yeah, where are you in relationship to these things? Because for me, like, weenies help. This idea helps when I am physically laying out a space.
Yeah, and that's really the main use of it. Isn't I mean, I can talk about character weenies and I can talk about plot weenies, and those are different, useful for laying out different kinds of space. But
Hmm.
but physical weenies places are really useful for maps and or at least mapping in your mind, even if you're not going to make a physical map.
Precisely. And if your players get really turned around, or they're somewhere that they're just lost, and you don't want them to be lost, you can say you see the bell tower in the distance.
Yeah,
The bell tower they know was where they started.
right. And then yeah, and you don't even have to be very specific. What you just said is enough for players to make a decision based on the bell tower. That you don't have to
Hmm.
go into a lot of detail if you don't have the map, if you don't know exactly how far away the bell tower is or what direction it's in. You just know that, like, oh, if they head back to the bell tower, they'll be heading back to start, basically, and that can be really useful. The other thing is, I was going to say, is that it's really helpful in a setting where, obviously there's some settings where you're going to have public transportation of sorts, right? You're gonna have a highway, and that's almost a giant one, because it's a long thing. But I think the bus station or whatever, or the train station, this could be
Hmm.
a kind of this is kind of a weenie, but it's also very much a useful item. Like, it's a travel station, so it's whatever. Or I mean, that's a good way. You could do a whole game where you're traveling between towns, and so the train station's always where you start. That'd be kind of a cool way to do a game. It'd be very simple. You just, okay, we
Yeah,
get off the train every time. We always travel by train. Well, you do the same thing at airports. Any form of big transportation where you're on a public conveyance, and you all have to get off the same spot. Pretty simple, and that can be really useful because then your characters always know, okay, that's where we began. Uh, and
yeah, or
even if you just do it for the beginning of your campaign, and you all arrive in the city at the same bus station, that's that's really cool. I mean, that's a good place to unify things, right?
mhm. Or it shows you where to go, like in Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
where it's not too hard to realize where you need to go because there's a giant fucking volcano right there with a giant glooming eye.
Yeah, exactly. You can see it from a
You
distance.
know where you need, you know the general direction of where you need to go.
Yeah, there's something really valuable, and especially in fantasy games or games where you can't travel that quickly, where you can actually see it from a distance, right? You can tell where it is. I mean, you can even do something similar with more abstract terms, such as, okay, there's a source of magic or something in the fantasy world, and even though you can't
Mm-hmm.
see it, you can feel where it is in relation to where you are,
Yeah.
almost like it's almost like you're the needle of the compass and it's pulling you toward it,
Well,
or
in the
pushing
old
you.
days
Yeah,
where sailors would sail the seas and they didn't have any landmarks, their weenies were the stars.
right. Their weenies were the stars. Uh, okay then. So maybe that's the name of this episode. So probably not. So
I
anyway.
like that. I like that for an episode.
So anyway, we are running a little low on time, but it's been interesting. Do you have anything else you want to add about weenies or any other examples you want to throw out?
Well, I just say that like also with a weenie, it's something that defines the place.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot about like what they could be. I would say that if you had a, you know, town that was being uh haunted,
Yeah.
maybe there is the creepy old asylum. Where are you in relation to the creepy old asylum? Something you can put a little character on it if you're going to have one.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And it's actually really important. I think you brought up a very important point here is that a weenie isn't just any landmark. It's a landmark that defines the space it's in. And that's why I
Precisely.
think that's why I also think character landmarks, I think the best, or character weenies, the best example is probably like Voldemort for a character weenie. Because he
Hmm.
defines about half the setting. All the evil wizards are basically Voldemort's people. So anyway, um, and all the good wizards still know about him. So, uh, yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's about all I have to say about weenies. So it's been fun. Yeah, and I think
yeah.
I think
Though
this
this
actually
has
is
been a
a
Mooks.
pretty good example. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah. Well, this has been a Mooks and Monsters. You can find us on mentalcellarpublications.com. You can email us at podcast@mentalcellarpublication.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at StageHat. Tim's at TNeederWriter. You can find this podcast wherever podcasts can be found. We're also on Facebook now. Am I missing anything?
No, we're good. Thanks for listening,
All
everybody.
right. Find your weenie.
But find it on your own. All right, bye.